is freezing. It is absolutely freezing, and I'm standing ankle deep in the water, which has filled up the lakes. So this is definitely not for the faint-hearted, but I think when I look at this, I think it's going to be worth it. Hey everyone, I'm Tim, and I've just finished a 9-month odyssey around Latin America. Now I'm reopening my diaries, and this time I'm bringing you along with me. Week by week, country by country, all the colors, all the craziness, all the food, all the music, and all the splendor. 9 months when each morning was a new adventure. The road was my companion, and Latin America cast its spell on me. This is my Latin America Diaries. Welcome back to Latin America Diaries, and welcome to incredible Bolivia. The Uyuni Salt Flats were a late addition to our itinerary. Amit wasn't sure at first if he wanted to do it, but in the end we decided to take the trip together from San Pedro de Atacama. That town really is in a very far-flung corner of Chile, and transport connections from the town head in one of two directions, either to the service city of Calama, from where you can try and get over into Bolivia, or in the other direction which we had come from, over the Andes towards Argentina. Uyuni is in a similarly far-flung part of Bolivia, and while it is possible to get public transport between San Pedro de Atacama and Uyuni, it involves lots of lonely bus stations out in the middle of nowhere, missed connections, overnight stops. As the crow flies, they're actually not that far apart, but the sheer logistical challenge of it means that most people who are in this part of Chile and want to head over into Bolivia, they normally do so as part of a tour. Now, we had heard of some horror stories about people who take tours like this from San Pedro over to the southwest of Bolivia. We'd heard of people suffering from altitude sickness, unsympathetic tour operators, bone-rattling jeep rides that seem to just go on for days and days, accommodation without heating and freezing cold nights, terrible food, and even food poisoning. And so it was because of all of this that we decided to splash out on a luxury private trip for the two of us. And although it certainly didn't come cheap, I believe it was worth every penny that we spent. We booked a 3-day tour with Howlanders, an international company which contracts reputable local company Expediciones Estrella del Sur to take you around. The whole 3 days for 2 people was around $3,000 US, and I've included the details for both Howlanders and Estrella del Sur in the video description below. We were picked up very early on the first day from our accommodation in San Pedro de Atacama, Casa Salcor, and driven to the Chile-Bolivia border, arriving before dawn. This border crossing can get very busy, especially with trucks traveling between Chile and Argentina towards Bolivia, and so our guide wanted to give us a head start. Stepping out before sunrise, we watched as the first light spilled over the volcanic landscape. It was magical. The anticipation of crossing into Bolivia was palpable, and it was freezing. Even with layers and down jackets, Amit said that it was the coldest that he had ever felt. Somehow I, who always feels cold, seemed to manage just fine. Once the Chilean border post opened, we exited Chile and drove along a rough road towards the Bolivian border post, which opened an hour later. Just outside of the Bolivian border post, while we were waiting for it to open for the day, our guides prepared us a really impressive breakfast out in the middle of nowhere. I can't remember whether it was a Bolivian woman with a Chilean man or a Chilean woman with a Bolivian man, but they were a married couple and they lived together in San Pedro de Atacama, and they did the drop-off service for the tour because after we'd cleared Bolivian immigration, we were picked up by Eber, who would be our guide for the next 3 days. We have just passed immigration and customs, and we have just crossed over into Bolivia, and we are with our driver, Eder, who's here. And he's going to be taking us on our adventure around the Salt Flats and basically the southwestern corner of Bolivia over the next 3 days. It is so exciting. He was kind, humble, enthusiastic, and extremely knowledgeable. Exactly the kind of person that you want as your companion when you're heading to Uyuni. After crossing the border, the journey from San Pedro to Atacama begins to feel a lot longer than it looks on a map. The roads, especially once you hit Bolivia, are mostly four-wheel drive tracks that somehow still carry trucks on them, winding through through the Reserva Nacional de Fauna Andina Eduardo Avaroa, a massive wilderness in Bolivia's far western reaches. There is a lot to see on the way, which is why most of these tours make several stops as you travel towards Uyuni. It's not just a visit to the salt flats. And although we were aware of that, we hadn't really, absorbed just quite how much we would be packing into these 3 days. We quickly learned just how incredible this region is. With so many winding tracks and intersections, it would have been easy to get lost. Our first stop was just over the border, Laguna Blanca, one of several lagoons in this area named for their distinctive colors. I think you can sort of see and understand from the look of it why it's called that, because obviously the surroundings and everything are all apparently, did you say borax and sodium here? This is one volcano that I believe we passed on the way into from Chile into Bolivia, and that is the Bolivian customs post over there that we just left. You can't really see them from here, but in this lagoon there are flamingos. You can just see them there, but not up close. We didn't linger though, because there was much more to see and we had to get to Uyuni before the end of the day. Next we entered the Salvador Dalí Desert, named for its surreal colors, unusual sand textures, and bizarre rock formations. Hey, we've arrived. Okay, so this is the Salvador Dalí Desert, because the desert landscape apparently looks like it was inspired by a Salvador Dalí painting. And I think, if I recall correctly, it's one particular painting which looks a bit like this, particularly like with those rock formations on the hill. It felt like driving through the middle of nowhere, and I mean, we often throw that term around, but this really felt like that. Endless roads, dramatic rocky hills, and sweeping landscapes with nothing but llamas and alpacas scattered across the plains. It really gives you a humbling sense of scale, just how tiny and insignificant you feel when you're surrounded by just such vast nothingness. So out here in the middle of nowhere, we have come across a borax mine. And this is our opportunity to see what borax actually feels like. So we've gotten out of the car and we're going to have a bit of a feel for what this... I've never actually, I don't know, maybe I'm stupid. I've never heard of borax before. Eso. It's like, it almost feels a bit soft or chalky. Maybe it's chalk. Yeah, it's really chalky. Around 1 p.m, we swung into this tiny town called Villamar, probably the largest settlement in the area. Ebra told us that we'd have about 40 minutes to walk around while lunch was prepared. That's very cool. It's cold here. Walking through town, we felt immediately immersed in Bolivia. Women wore traditional hats, braids, and layered clothing, and above the doorways of homes, small altars or offerings were displayed. Lunch in the local eatery was fantastic, and this is one of the places where we started to see the money that we'd spent was paying off. There were noodles, fresh salads, chicken, soft drinks, and even a Bolivian wine. Many of the dishes were a mix of traditional Bolivian cuisine and adaptations for tourists. After that, we continued onwards on the road towards Piedra del Copa del Mundo, which is the World Cup rock. The formation is striking, and it's easy to see why it's earned its name. Surrounding the rocks were jareta plants, also known as Azarella compacta. These cushion-like plants resemble moss or giant beehives, but they're incredibly hardy desert organisms. They extract moisture from the air and rocks, creating their own tiny ecosystems, a living miracle actually thriving in the high-altitude desert. We also explored Italia Perdida, a cluster of bizarre boulder formations. You can scramble across the rocks for unique perspectives over the landscape, and the shapes and textures here are utterly alien, like a lunar landscape on steroids. As we continued driving throughout the afternoon, the landscape around us also began to change. We passed lakes dotted with flamingos and gradually started seeing signs of civilization, most notably quinoa plantations. Quinoa, as you probably already know, is a grain native to the Central Andes, and it's a staple in Bolivian and Peruvian cuisine. Seeing these farms was a sign that we were slowly leaving the wilderness behind and moving towards more settled areas. One of our last stops on the route for that afternoon was at the Cañón de la Anaconda, which is a canyon named for its shape, winding and snaking through the valley like an enormous anaconda. By this point, we were at significant altitude. It was about 4,000 meters above sea level. Altitude sickness can start to kick in, or at least is noticeable, from 2,500 meters. So we were well and truly at high altitude at this point. And although we were feeling okay, we could definitely notice the change. The air was becoming thin, and we were doing okay at this point, but we could definitely feel it. We eventually reached the town of Villa Alota and hit the main highway heading towards Uyuni. We made a right-hand turn, and suddenly we were back on sealed roads, passing through towns that, while larger than Villamar, still carried a sense of remote survival. Unlike the uncanny charm of Villamar, these towns had a rugged, practical energy. Places where people were just living and enduring at high altitude in one of the harshest environments on Earth. By around 5 p.m, we arrived in Uyuni, and by this point we were utterly exhausted. We'd been awake since about 4 a.m. from memory. We'd done an international border crossing and then spent the entire day in a jeep, off-road, and sightseeing at high altitude, so we were done by this point. Our destination was the Palacio de Sal, a luxury hotel on the edge of the Uyuni Salt Flats, and walking in there, this was a sight for sore eyes. The entire hotel is made of salt blocks mined directly from the flats, and even in areas where you don't see salt, it's integrated into the walls behind the surfaces. As we walked in, we were offered complimentary drinks by staff who were dressed in really, really nice attire. And the whole thing just felt like a fever dream. I mean, like up there on the roof of the world, and suddenly we were back in luxury. No complaints, but it was out there. We checked in, we relaxed for a moment, and then Eber was like, I'll see you in 30 minutes to take you out to the salt flats for sunset. Amit and I looked at each other and we both had the same thought at the same moment, and it was just like, can we just stay here for now? We need to do nothing for a while. Eber was happy to, be like, okay, fine, that's great, enjoy your dinner. But, we missed the sunset on the salt flats that night, and in retrospect, I think that I maybe regret it a little bit in a way, because I know that what happened the next morning on the salt flats, it didn't quite have the same effect as if we had gone for sunset that night. It would have been quite different, and you'll see what I mean in just a minute. But at the same time, I think about some of the other stories that I've heard. I mean, I've heard of people who arrive at Uyuni and they never see the salt flats because they're bedridden with altitude sickness. In the scheme of things, I feel like that was a small price to pay for our sanity and not feeling totally exhausted for the next 2 days. Instead, we enjoyed the hotel's spa as the sun set over the flats. And later we had a lovely dinner where we sampled roast llama, which tastes just like lamb or goat. We tried Bolivia's national drink, chufle, a cocktail made of singani, which is a Bolivian high altitude brandy, and then that's mixed with ginger and lime. And we just collapsed into bed for the night. And that was when the high altitude really began to make itself known. Because I was lying there, and although I was exhausted, I couldn't get to sleep. And then I realized that my heart was racing. And what it was basically my heart, because of the lack of oxygen in the rarefied air, my heart was pumping as much blood as possible to try and get as much oxygen around my body as possible and try and grasp whatever it could. And obviously you can't fall asleep if your heart's racing. So I really didn't sleep well that night, and it just goes to show how helpless we are, even in the luxury of a sublime hotel like that one. how helpless we are as humans in the face of the forces of nature. If this video is getting your heart racing, make sure that you get to a doctor and get your blood pressure checked, but also when you get back from that, please give it a like. If you manage to catch your breath, also please subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon to be notified whenever I upload new episodes from this series. And if you like what you're seeing and your cardiac health is going well, please share my content across social media and tell your family and friends about my work and your diagnosis. It really helps me grow my YouTube channel and hopefully they'll love hearing from you. Eber had told me the night before to set my alarm for 5 a.m. the next morning to head out to the salt flats to witness sunrise over the salt flats. I had had a terrible night's sleep, but I'd missed the sunset and knew that I wanted to at least witness the sunrise, so I woke up bleary-eyed and with a throbbing headache. I mean, it's the kind of thing that it felt just like a hangover, actually. But anyway, I gritted my teeth and made my way through it just the way that I have on so many Monday mornings at the office in Australia, and headed out with Eber to the salt flats before dawn. Okay, it's coming up to 6 o'clock in the morning. We've woken up early and we are headed out to the salt flats, and we are yeah, better switch the light off. We're headed out to the salt flats to experience the sunrise over the salt flats, and it's already getting light. I've heard this is a really magical experience, so I can't wait to share it with you. Heading out into the salt flats in the darkness was exciting and mysterious. I wasn't sure what I was about to experience. Depending on the time of year, the flats are either dry expanses of pure white salt or partially flooded. The flood tends to occur between December to April, the wet season, and creates a mirrored reflective surface. We were there during the wet season, and it's when the shallow water, just about ankle deep, transforms the flats into a giant natural mirror. I put on gumboots that Eber had brought along, but it was just like the gumboots, my socks, and then my feet, and my feet were blocks of ice by this point. They were so cold. But the moment was unforgettable. Okay, one thing I can say out here is it is freezing. It is absolutely freezing, and I'm standing ankle deep in the water which has filled up the lakes in recent times. So this is definitely not for the faint-hearted, but I think when I look at this, I think it's going to be worth it. We stood there waiting as the sun slowly rose over the horizon. The morning light spread across the flats in golden hues. Unfortunately, because it was windy that morning, the water wasn't perfectly still, so I didn't get the full shimmering mirror-like reflection that a calm sunset would have provided. Even so, it was mesmerizing. Standing there, watching the sun creep over the flats, I felt like I was on the moon, utterly alien and breathtaking. After sunrise, we jumped back into the Jeep and sped back across the flats towards the Palacio de Sal for a hearty breakfast. Energized, we were ready to explore the flats during the daytime. It is now 9 o'clock in the morning and we are heading out into the salt flats. We're all awake, we've fed, rested, breakfasted and everything. Amit's here.
Hello.
And Eber is driving, our trusty driver, of course. And we are heading out into the middle of the salt flats where we are hopefully going to get to experience the reflective phenomenon when the water is super still and you're able to see like the reflection of the sky in the water. So fingers crossed, if the wind stays, you know, like calm and low, then we'll get to do that. Back on the flats with full daylight, everything looked completely different. The shallow water was crystal clear and the salt beneath was blindingly white. The Jeep sped across the flats, leaving ripples behind us. As Eber drove us out towards the center of the flats, the horizon seemed to vanish. The flats stretch so far that it feels as if you're floating on a cloud. I'd been skeptical hearing about this, but the effect is real. Sitting there in the Jeep with the vast expanse around me, it was unexpectedly disorienting, a sensation of flying over another world. So I have to say, I think this is probably one of the most spectacular places I've ever been in my life, right? Would you agree?
Absolutely.
It's like...
It's breathtaking.
Yeah. And not just because of the altitude. Like, like it is actually breathtaking. It is so still. And it's just... I mean, it's otherworldly. Out in the middle of the salt flats is the original Palacio de Sal, the original salt palace. It used to operate as a hotel where guests could stay overnight in the middle of the flats, but it has been since closed for conservation and maintenance reasons. Now it's more like a historic monument, a reminder of the area's unique history, and you can take a walk through it. Nearby, there's also a Dakar Rally monument. The Dakar Rally used to run from Paris in France to Dakar in Senegal, but due to geopolitical issues, it moved locations over the years, and at one point, the rally actually traversed these Bolivian salt flats. On the other side of the former hotel, there is a mound featuring flags left by visitors. You're even welcome to plant your own flag in the mound. Being out there, surrounded by the endless white and blue, I struggle to find the words to describe it. I mean, surreal or infinite. They still don't really do it justice. They don't capture what you're witnessing, the vastness of it. Just the horizonless expanse of being out there in the middle of nowhere, and just these two colors that just define everything as far as the eye can see. One of the highlights, of course, is perspective-based photography, although unfortunately Ricardo was just a little bit out of focus. Eber even suggested a 360-degree time-lapse video of Amit and I standing in the middle of nowhere, and that was awesome. And yes, I can confirm that the water is actually that salty. I did stick my finger into it and then taste it, and it is pretty intense. You do not want any of that anywhere near your eyes. After our time on the flats, we returned to Uyuni for a quick town tour. Around lunchtime, we did some souvenir shopping before heading to the train cemetery, a bizarre and fascinating sight. Historically, Uyuni was connected by rail all the way down to Antofagasta, now in Chile, transporting minerals and materials from the mines here to be exported from the main port there on the ocean. Over time, the railway fell into disrepair, leaving these trains abandoned. Walking among them felt like stepping into another era, a desert boneyard of industrial history. We would actually see the end of this rail line a few days later when we flew out of Antofagasta, and stay tuned for that in the next episode. Back at the tour company's Uyuni base, we were given lunch and introduced to the wonders of Coca tea, a traditional Andean beverage. Coca is a plant native to the region, and its leaves contain a mild stimulant, not unlike green tea, and that can help alleviate altitude sickness. Chewed or brewed as a tea, Coca has been used for centuries across the Andes. I gave it a try, and it really was just like green tea. It was refreshing, and it had like a subtle energizing effect, but no more than, say, a cup of green tea. Interestingly, however, the coca leaves that make up the tea are the basis for the drug cocaine. Importantly, while coca leaves are the raw ingredient for cocaine, the tea itself is completely safe, legal in Bolivia, and culturally significant. Former Bolivian President Evo Morales campaigned to protect and promote the coca leaf as a natural plant with important cultural and medicinal uses, quite separate from its illicit associations. Now, if you ever need to fill up petrol in Uyuni, make sure that you do it with quite a bit of time to spare, because we were told that queues for petrol at petrol stations in Uyuni normally last in excess of 1 hour. So while Ebra went and filled up the tank of petrol for our journey back towards Chile, he dropped us off in the center of Uyuni for a short walk around the center of town, and to try and get an idea of what urban life in this remote corner of Bolivia might be like. The town of Uyuni was founded as a military outpost for the Bolivian army back in 1890. Even today, while it's a significant and reasonably developed town, it still feels incredibly remote. We found a cute little cafe near the main square, grabbed a coffee, and soaked in the local atmosphere. Once Ebba returned, we got back into the Jeep and started making our way back towards the Chilean border. I would return to Bolivia alone to see more of the country about a month later, but that afternoon we retraced the landscapes that we had traveled through just 24 hours earlier. Fields of quinoa stretching wide with alpacas and llamas roaming free, families with babies trotting alongside adults, and the magenta-colored quinoa fields contrasting beautifully against the blue sky and snowy volcanic peaks. The sun slowly set over the Andean wilderness, painting the scene in golden light. We stopped for the night in Villamar, staying in the Hotel Malcu Cueva, a small but thoughtfully run hotel. Despite its basic facilities, the warmth and effort of the staff shone through. The buffet was modest but carefully prepared, and the chef and waiter clearly took pride in their work. That night, the sleep was challenging, but this time it was Amit that was really feeling the effects of the altitude. I slept better. Maybe I was just so tired, or maybe I had begun to acclimatize. The next morning, we were off bright and early for our last day of the tour. Good morning. It is our third day traveling through the Bolivian wilderness. We have woken up in Villamar and are now traveling back towards the Chilean border, but there are a couple of stops along the way. Amit is sitting over here to my left.
Good morning.
We've got our ever-dependable driver, Eber. Good morning. And yeah, can't wait to see what's in store for today. We headed towards Laguna Colorada, the famous red lagoon, although its colors shift depending on the angle and the weather. Deep mauve, blue, gray, orange, or white. So we're walking up towards the viewpoint of Laguna Colorada, and I think this is probably the first time that we've really felt the altitude here, right? It's like we've literally just come from there. If you can see like the car park there, it's not that far, and I feel like I'm really out of breath already. Same?
Same.
Yeah.
Oh.
It's home to large populations of flamingos. We had about 40 minutes to walk around, taking in the surreal scenery and watching the colors change across the surface. Next, we headed to Sol de Mañana, an incredibly active geothermal field with fumaroles, hot springs, and a pungent sulfur smell. There are similar geothermal spots in Chile near San Pedro de Atacama, and day trips are often offered out towards them, but we knew that we were visiting this as part of our tour, so that's why we skipped them in Chile. Geothermal plants here even convert the natural energy into electricity for some of the small local communities. It was here, or near here, that we reached the highest point of our journey at around 5,000 meters above sea level, surrounded by barren volcanic landscapes. We then headed back down the hill a little bit towards a soothing stop at the hot springs right at the edge of Laguna Salada. This is the end of 3 long days in the Bolivian wilderness. And it's beautiful. Sitting in the steaming water, I felt the stress of the past few days. Altitude, bumpy roads, and sleepless nights, it all just melted away. It was a blissful, almost meditative pause in the middle of the wilderness. Things like this are what really stuck with me with Bolivia. It was like, it's vivid, you know, these experiences, these moments, the colors, the scenery, it's vivid. After a small locally prepared lunch, our final stop in Bolivia was Laguna Verde, or the Green Lagoon. Its distinctive color comes from naturally occurring minerals, including cyanide compounds, which give it that striking emerald hue. Standing there, Amit turned to me and was just like, "Can you believe what we've done?" He was sort of saying, like, this is the kind of place that location scouts go out for to look for movie sets or, you know, places to go filming or, you know, taking photographs in. And we'd packed all of these experiences into 3 very intense days. We have come to the end of our time in Bolivia, and I just wanted to say big thank you, muchísimo gracias, to Eber, our new friend who has taken us valiantly all around this corner of the country. It has been incredible. Muchísimas gracias. And just like that, our adventure in Bolivia concluded. We said goodbye to Eber, crossed back into Chile mid-afternoon, and were picked up by the same couple who had driven us up to the border 2 days earlier. I don't regret choosing the luxury option for 1 minute. We were looked after so well. You know, Eber was such an amazing guide. The transport was comfortable, the food was delicious, a little bit monotonous, but I mean, look, it was tasty and it was quality, and the accommodation was superb. And apart from that first morning out on the Chilean border, we didn't really feel cold the entire time. Another thing I can say is that it was a bit of a testing moment for me too in my Spanish, because one thing that I haven't told you up until this point is that Eber spoke almost no English. And you could choose an English language option on the tour. For whatever reason, we hadn't chosen that. And so I spent the entire 3 days coordinating with Eber in Spanish and translating into English for Amit, and then back from Amit into Spanish to Eber. And I think I pulled it off okay, so I was feeling pretty proud of myself by this point. The only thing I would say about this whole experience is that it is a lot to pack into 3 days. You can take slightly longer trips. I think they offer tours of 4 or 5 days that you can do this in. I'm not sure if they space everything out a bit more or if they just try and pack even more into those days. So it's a very intense 3 days. But again, no regrets. I mean, thank you Estrella del Sur, thank you Howlanders, and especially thank you Eber for that amazing journey. You know, many people, it's a saying in English that, you know, you feel on top of the world, but we actually were on top of the world. And in next week's episode, I'll be taking you from the very top of the world right down to sea level again, because I will be completing my crossing of Latin America from the Atlantic Ocean all the way down to the Pacific Ocean in Antofagasta in Chile, from where we will head onwards to our next incredible destination. See you then.